Greetings. Welcome to everyone. We are going to study Prophet Daniel chapter 8. The vision begins with Medo-Persian kingdom and then goes to Greek kingdom, and it speaks about one king, merciless towards God's people. In one chapter it starts with Babylon, in the next with Medo-Persia, depending on the time the prophet lives. Babylon is reaching its end. A new kingdom is authorized, the second world kingdom. Then the third, then fourth, and it goes all the way off the end until our days. In the 3rd year of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared unto me, even unto me Daniel, after that which appeared unto me at the first. And I saw in a vision, and it came to pass, when I saw, that I was at Shushan in the palace, which is in the province of Elam. And I saw in a vision, and I was by the river of Ulai. So the prophet was located at some river. Then I lifted up mine eyes, and saw, and behold, there stood before the river a ram, which had 2 horns, and the 2 horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher came up last. Now we have to understand who is represented by the ram in this matter. So, not to wander much around, we move right away to verse 20 of the same chapter. What does it say to us? The interpretation given by the angel says, "The ram which thou sawest having 2 horns are the kings of Media and Persia." The Bible interprets itself. Do we see how many times we got the one same history of the world interpreted in the Bible? That history goes from 6th century BC, from Babylon all the way until the toes, which are smote by the stone, which is the second coming of Christ. Then we got 4 beasts, and the 4th one had 10 horns, and then the little horn plucked out by roots another 3 horns, and then it grew big, and it goes all the way until the second coming of Christ. Here in this chapter, again, we have the history of the world, but since Babylon is running out, then the history begins with Medo-Persia, and again it goes all the way until the Christ's second coming. For instance, when we read chapter 2 of Daniel about the statue, we receive some image. Then when we read chapter 7, then we receive 4 beasts, even more detailed history. And now in chapter 8, the history goes even more to detail, and not to mention chapters 11 and 12, which repeats all this again, but with much more attention to detail. Then we receive the beautiful history, and even the little events within that history which were foretold, which God's people could recognize in the time in which they lived, and they could see the fulfillment of it before their eyes. So the ram, it says here, it represents the second kingdom. And what do the 2 horns upon the ram represent? It says that 2 horns are the kings of Media and Persia. It is interesting that the 2 were asymmetric. One grew greater than the other, and truly Persia was dominant power. It is presented upon the statue of Daniel 2 as the right hand and the left hand. One hand is always stronger while the other is weaker. On the bear from chapter 7, it was leaning on one leg. Its support was there. Here in chapter 8, we got 2 horns, but one is greater, and it grew greater at later stage. So you see how the Bible, in a beautiful way, depicts the kingdom of this world. Usually people out there on the internet like to suggest other interpretations to this, such as the ram or bear could be Russia, China. They think it could be this or that. However, the Bible is explicitly clear. The ram which thou sawest having 2 horns are the kings of Media and Persia. And all we can say is Amen. Praise be to God who himself interpreted this for us. And then he says, I saw the ram pushing westward and northward and southward, so that no beast may stand before him, neither was there any that could deliver out of his hand. But he did according to his will and became great. The directions in which the ram attacks represent directions in which the Medo-Persian conquered their enemies from the east. After successful conquests, the kingdom at the time of Ahasuerus consisted of 127 provinces stretching from India to Ethiopia. In Daniel 7, this power is represented by a bear that has 3 ribs in his mouth, signifying the 3 provinces. These were Babylon, Lydia, and Egypt, that were especially oppressed by this power. And as I was considering, behold, an he-goat came from the west on the face of the whole earth, and touched not the ground. What was the next kingdom past Medo-Persia? We learn of it in previous chapter. It was Greece. Let us see now where the Persians were located, what country is that today, and what country was Greece, and where was it located, and from what side it began to attack. We can see all that up on the screen. Greece lies westward of Persia, so the attack came from that direction. The goat not touching the ground signifies the tremendous speed with which the Greek army moved, rushing from place to place with the speed of the wind. The haste of conquest is described in Daniel 7 by the image of a leopard with 4 wings. And as I was considering, behold, an he-goat came from the west on the face of the whole earth, and touched not the ground. And the goat had a notable horn between his eyes. Let us now read verse 21 of the same chapter. And the rough goat is the king of Gracia, and the great horn that is between his eyes is the first king. We know that was Greek Macedonian kingdom led by the first great conqueror, and that was Alexander of Macedon. We see that Greece is westward from today's Iran. Now we see Greece from the west going eastward towards Iran, and history tells us that Alexander of Macedon went all the way to India. He was going from west and moving eastward, and that was the goat with 1 horn between his eyes. This horn describes this king. The image shows a coin with the image of one of the Greek ruler bearing the horns of a goat as symbols of his strength and power, just as this biblical prophecy described long beforehand. About 200 years before Daniel, the first king of Greece, Caranus of Macedon, followed a herd of goats looking for a settlement where they would settle and live. A herd of goats settled where Greece is today. He named the city Aegean or Goat City, and the people he named Aegean or Goat People, and the sea Aegean Sea or Goat Sea. The goat is a suitable sign to describe the Greek kingdom because back then Greeks called themselves the Goat People and put it a sign on their coat of arms and flag. Alexander's son by Roxana was called Alexander Agus, or son of the goats, and some of Alexander's successors are represented on their coins with goat horns. And as I was considering, behold, he-goat came from the west on the face of the whole earth, and touched not the ground. What is the purpose of the goat running so fast that it touched not the ground? On image with leopard we see 4 wings. It tells us that the king is so fast and powerful, and the speed he goes is so great that he doesn't have time to touch the ground. And the goat had a notable horn between his eyes. A notable horn between God's eyes represents the first king of Greek kingdom, Alexander the Great. He said to his generals and soldiers, I give you no wages, but your wages shall be all the land that you conquer. So they were unstoppable. And that little army, in comparison to great Medo-Persian army, was so great and unstoppable. They were true warriors. And he came to the ram that had 2 horns, which I had seen standing before the river. The ram, namely Darius' army, stood by the river Granicus in Phrygia, and then Alexander's army jumped into the river and swam to the other shore to attack the enemy with a speed and ferocity that is hard to imagine. The battles between the Greeks and the Persians were fierce, and ran unto him in fury of his power. And I saw him come close unto the ram, and he was moved with choler against him, and smote the ram, and brake his 2 horns, and there was no power in the ram to stand before him. But he cast him down to the ground, and stamped upon him, and there was none that could deliver the ram out of his hand. 2 horns were broken, the ram was thrown to the ground, and defeated. Medo-Persia was defeated, the land broken and desolate, army destroyed, and cities broken down and burnt. From this time on, Third World Kingdom comes in power. Let us see now how the prophecy is so precise. What does it say next? Therefore the he-goat waxed very great, and when he was strong, the great horn was broken. So when Greece was the strongest in its full power, when conquered a lot of countries, then the great horn was broken, the king got drunk and died. And for it, in its place, came up, it says notable ones, these are horns, toward the 4 winds of heaven. The great horn broke at its climax of power, when the empire was stable and no one could overthrow it. Then the kingdom was divided into 4 parts. Why the leopard has 4 heads from chapter 7 is because they represent the 4 generals which come from the great horn which was broken. Alexander organized frequent and unrestrained drinking feasts, so after one of those feasts 20 of them died due to the consequences of drunkenness. In one of them Alexander drank a full Herculean pitcher of wine at once, which is about 6 liters. Overcome by severe fever, he died 11 days later on June 13, 323 BC, at the age of 32. And his kingdom was divided into 4 parts after his death, into 4 winds, or 4 sides of the earth. We read of it in Daniel 11 verse 4, where he says that when he shall stand up, his kingdom shall be broken, and shall be divided towards the 4 winds of heaven, and not to his posterity, not according to his dominion which he ruled. Alexander died of a fever caused by excessive drinking, and the kingdom was divided between his 4 generals. The 4 leopard heads represent these 4 generals: Cassander, Lysimachus, Seleucus, and Ptolemy. When people about him saw that he was going to die, they asked him to whom he was going to leave his kingdom, for he had wife, children, etc. Just before he closed his eyes, he managed to respond, to the strongest. When they heard the strongest, they first killed all his children, so there would be no any successor. Then remained 24 generals. They began fighting each other, and at the end of the extermination 4 strongest generals remained. and they divided the kingdom to 4 parts. Because of this reason, people, when reading history, find there were 24 generals and thus doubt about Bible's accuracy of the events. However, study needs to go deeper to be able to collect all necessary details. For me personally, what God says is the most important thing. Bible tells us there will be first king, then split to 4 kings, that is 4 horn or 4 leopard heads. So it is very important to stick to what Bible tells us. Otherwise, we would end up with some completely different interpretations of prophecies. Verse 4 of chapter 11 is interesting, which tells us that the kingdom will not go to his posterity, nor according to his dominion which he ruled, that is, not to his family, not to his offspring. See how Bible is very precise. This prophecy was given to Daniel 200 years prior to these events, describing in detail kingdoms, the kings, when he rise to power in his climax of strength, when shall be broken, and the 4 shall come after him. All this is given to us that on this ground we can believe when he says that Christ will come the second time, we know for sure it would be. It is not just some idea that he is coming second time, but the history is going to the end, and then the time shall come for him to come the second time. So all this that fulfilled is telling us that the stone at the end, the stone from Daniel 2, is coming also to abolish all the worldly kingdoms and establish his everlasting kingdom. And out of one of them came forth a little horn, which waxed exceeding great, toward south, and toward east, and toward the pleasant land. Out of one of them is not referring to the 4 horns of Greek kingdom, but it refers to 4 winds, that is the 4 sides of the earth, in which those horns were stretched. Each of them went to one side, that is, it says one wind, that is one side of the earth. And we saw on the previous map that one went to east, another north, another south, and the last to the west. The little horn is one mentioned in Daniel's prophecies. If we follow Roman conquest, we will see the south was to Africa, and towards east it reached unto Jews. We know from Gospels that during Christ's time Roman kingdom was there. And in this verse we see the horizontal or earthly extension of this kingdom, while in verse 10 we read, "And he waxed great even to the host of heaven, and he cast down some of the hosts and of the stars to the ground, and stamped upon them." We see here its religious or vertical advancement. We know that the captain of the host of heaven is our Lord Jesus Christ. We find it in Joshua 5. Hosts and stars are angels, citizens of sinless worlds, and also Christ's faithful men on earth. When we look at the dark Middle Ages, we got morning stars, stars of reformation. They shone as stars in the night here on earth while the darkness of Middle Ages were enshrouding the world. Also it says in Daniel chapter 12 that righteous will shine as stars, as the brightness of the firmament. It says he threw them down to the ground and stamped upon them. They were many deaths, stakes, torches, reformers, the stars, thrown to the ground. Papacy could not get up and throw down angels and citizens of sinless worlds, but could do to the representatives of Christ here on earth. We are the representatives of the host of heaven on earth, and it is common that the little horn can cast them down. Other chapters say the same thing. Some were people of God are called saints, some were remnant, while in this chapter it is labeled as the host of heaven, and these are the people of God on earth. So, first in verse 9 we see Rome as imperial Rome, conquering on earth, while in verse 10 goes vertically to heaven, blaspheming, taking down the host of heaven, and let's read verse 11 now, how far the Rome, that is papacy, goes. Yea, he magnified himself even to the prince of the host, and by him the daily sacrifice was taken down, and the place of the sanctuary was cast down. The daily represents Christ's mediating service in the heavenly temple, which he performs for us, and through which we receive the forgiveness of sins. Through this service, the sinner confesses his sin and asks for forgiveness, and God cleanses him of his sin and records his sin in the sanctuary. This is how the heavenly sanctuary is defiled. See what the horn is doing. It even grows up to the prince of hosts and the prince of the captain of the host, or the high priest, our Jesus. He grew so much he reached Jesus Christ. What he done is took his daily intercession service that Christ is doing in heaven now. He established a service on earth. As he is mediator, high priest, he forgives the sins. Then he made confessionals for people to make confessions to him, and in that way he made himself equal with Jesus, taking his service for himself. Of course, he cannot go to heaven and literally take it, but by indoctrinating people here on earth, he was able to darken their minds and let them practice these lies. It says that this was given to him, and why was so? Because when people want to leave Christ's ministry in heaven and turn to earthly man and begin to confess their sins to him, call him their Holy Father, to ask for forgiveness from him, that he is the way to heaven, and etc., then Jesus' ministry in heaven values nothing. But we know that Jesus began that service in heaven 31 AD, after his resurrection when he ascended to heaven. For centuries, Jesus was doing the ministry, and then suddenly from 538 AD until 1798 AD, it was given to papacy in its hand, and the little horn abolished Christ's ministry and installed his own. We see how the great apostasy appeared here. A sinful man exalts himself so much to the point to equal himself with Christ, to whom the entire universe bows down. He arrogantly cancels Christ's ministry to establish his own, and this is going to repeat very soon in our days again, when Christ's ministry will be cancelled and enforce the ministry of the beast and its image. And an host was given him against the daily sacrifice by reason of transgression. And he cast down the truth to the ground, and he practiced and prospered. God permits this. He does it so that great apostasy expose itself. Each generation has their own temptations, and God is allowing this great apostasy that entire universe can see how far it can go when God allows it. So whatever the papacy was doing, it says it practiced and prospered. Verse 13 says, Then I heard one saint speaking, and another saint said unto that certain saint which spake, How long shall be the vision concerning the daily sacrifice, and the transgression of desolation, to give both the sanctuary and the host to be trodden under foot? We got several questions here in this verse. One is how long the vision will last for, and this is one of the long visions, for it began with Medo-Persia and it goes very far into the future. Another thing he wanted to know, how long will transgression or treading down of Christ's ministry last for, and when it will be re-established. And what is the truth? It is interesting how disciples had a clear picture of Christ and his mediatorial ministry in heaven. Paul speaks of it clearly in Hebrews. This was clear to apostles. It was clear to apostolic church. And as the time passes by, the truth is meant to progress, not to go back. However, as the time goes by, the devil brings up a system where the truth was destroyed systematically throughout the ages. While misconceptions are preached, and the effect of it after 1260 years is that people completely lost the knowledge of Christ's ministry in heaven. God permitted this system to progress, to extend that He erased the truth in the end. Sounds strange to us today, but if you remember that these were more than 12 centuries, and how many generations went through with severe living, persecutions, inquisition, burning of Bibles, and how much truth could be passed on. However, the answer is given, and it is prophesied in this very chapter we are learning of today, and we read it in verse 14. Unto 2300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. However, if we read this verse in different translations, such as International Standard Version, we find that it says it will take 2300 evenings and mornings. Then the sanctuary will be reconsecrated. What a difference! The second translation tells us that after 2300 days, then the holy place will be reconsecrated. Some translations also say restored. When we read cleansed, it often gives us a different conclusion. We know that these 2300 years go from the king Artaxerxes in 457 BC until 1844 AD. From this vision of 2300 days, that is years, 70 weeks are cut off, which are mentioned and later explained in Daniel chapter 9. The 70 weeks also go from 457 BC, but it ends in 34 AD, and these were cut off from 2300 years. The last week of 70 weeks is the last 7 years when Jesus was baptized, started his ministry on earth. Then in 31 AD, in the middle of that week, he was crucified. And in 34 AD, at the end of the last week, Stephen was stoned. If we read until 2300 days, it means until the 1844 it will be done. However, the true meaning is 1844 and then or after that year will be reconsecrated, or rather restored. So from 1844 ongoing, even until today. So what was broken that it had to be restored? The mediatorial ministry of Christ was exchanged with the ministry of the beast, that is the little horn, and that was faulty or incorrect state. The little horn brought the truth to the ground, and the question is when it will be restored to the right place. God says until 1844, and then the truth will be restored to its place. And it was then indeed fulfilled, for certain Christians began to preach that Jesus is up in heaven, that on that year judgment began, etc. And God shows this year is important because this truth which began now to be preached was rejected by other Christian churches, and they remain a remnant which made up the last seventh church, and this is the time when we are living in today. These are also the people of judgment because they say there is judgment in heaven going on. There is sanctuary in heaven and mediatorial ministry of Jesus Christ, which he began in 31 AD and carried it through, with exception that on 1844 he begins to do judgment along with the mediatorial ministry he began on 31 AD. So today we have mediator and attorney at the judgment, and it will be so until the end of judgment. That is also the time when the end of mercy for this world will come. It is very important that the remnant people preach this truth prophesied in the Bible. God has people who will restore, as it says here, or reconsecrate the truth to its own place. This is very important, for soon will the misconception from dark Middle Ages be preached again. There will be beast, his image, his mark, and the eyes of the people will again be pointed down here on earth. while God's people will be pointing their views up towards heaven, saying how Jesus is soon closing his ministry, judgment. Worship God who created heavens and earth, and do not worship a beast and his image, his mark, etc. In Daniel 8:14, Hebrew word tzadak is used, which means righteous, corrected, revealed, restored, and it refers to the heavenly sanctuary. What was symbolically overthrown, the daily sacrifice, the truth, and his holy habitation, will again be just, right, revealed, restored at the end of 2300-year period. While the word for literal physical cleansing is Yom Kippur, it's a day of cleansing. In Daniel 8:14 the word used is tzadak, which refers to something being revealed, put back in its right place, restore. Something that was hidden now is coming up to the light, up to surface. The truth which was hidden by this system, the divine truth, will now come up out of darkness to the light after 1844. Prior to this time it was widely spread and believed that this earth is the sanctuary, and its cleansing represents the second coming of Christ. However, when the Christians of that time took the Bible, they were praying and studying and taught by the Holy Spirit of Jesus Christ that there is no biblical evidence for widely accepted belief that the earth represents the sanctuary. Take and read Epistle to Hebrews 8, verses 1 to 5, and see when Paul spoke of these things to the Jews. They kept insisting to the Old Testament way of things, the tabernacle, that is the sanctuary, but Paul was pointing their look above to the heavenly sanctuary. We live in the days of New Testament. There is an original temple in heaven, and we need to look upon Jesus, who is our high priest up in sanctuary in heaven, and who does the daily ministry or service for us men. So apostles and early church knew this. However, this was lost, and by 1844 no one knew it. Verse 11 tells us that daily sacrifice was taken away and the place of the sanctuary was cast down. So the place of the sanctuary was not in heaven anymore, but on earth, as we early mentioned. All believed at that time that sanctuary is on earth, and daily ministry was overtaken by the beast, as well as Christ's holy place. This is what the Dark Middle Ages had done to Christ's ministry. In Old Testament, Moses was instructed to make earthly tabernacle of congregation, that is, sanctuary in likeness which was shown to him upon the mountain. He had to make it in likeness of the heavenly one. We can find that in Hebrew 8. Paul was here explaining to the Jews of where is Jesus now, for they had no issues about the earthly sanctuary of Moses, Aaron, animal offerings, the ministry of the sanctuary, etc. However, the core of the message is emphasized here, where Jesus is and what he does. Verse 2 tells us that Jesus is a minister of the sanctuary and of the true tabernacle, which the Lord pitched and not man. Jesus is in the true, original tabernacle, i.e., sanctuary in heaven. In these words is the sanctuary of the New Testament revealed. The former sanctuary was built by men with Moses, while the latter was built by the Lord himself. In the former the ministry was done by earthly priests, while in the latter the ministry is done by heavenly high priest, that is Jesus, by the right hand of the Father. For first sanctuary was on earth, but the second is in heaven. That is why Christians of that time experienced great disappointment, for they did not understand the truth about sanctuary. But after 1844, that truth about sanctuary will be restored. In the text of the Bible, it does not say 1844, but after 2300 days, that is years, this truth will be revealed and preached, i.e., kept preaching, and it will be going on continually. We can and will know in the closing days of world history where our high priest is, what he does, we will know it so close as we were up in heaven with him. We know this by faith because we study Old Testament, New Testament, and God is giving and will be giving his Spirit to understand all this. The latter rain will be poured out soon, and all the truths will be there. And by faith we'll be following our high priest, and we will know things exactly when they begin, when they end, when Jesus is taking off the robes, when he's changing the different robes, and when he's about to come. All these things will be clear to us. So this all began to be revealed in 1844, and it carried on through. At this time, judgment in heaven began also. In previous chapter of Daniel, it was mentioned that after the beasts, judgment was set, and books were opened. So always there are beasts, then judgment comes. But in this chapter we receive the time when it shall begin. When it is spoken of Christ and his ministries in heaven, he has two ministries, daily and annual. These two ministries are separated. First is done in the holy place of the sanctuary, the first room, and the second ministry is done in the second room called the most holy place, or Holy of Holies. One is done every day, thus called daily. The other is once a year, thus is called yearly or annual ministry. It is important that one ministry is in one room and the other ministry is in the other room. The first ministry has special garments which contain the breastplate of judgment. The breastplate is bound to daily ministry. However, when the Day of Atonement begins, the annual ministry, one day in a year, then the garments are changed, the breastplate is taken off, and the high priest would wear only pure white linen robes. The judgment must be done by then, so that annual service in the most holy place could begin. Some people believe that on 1844 Jesus began judgment, entered the most holy place, that is the second room, and began the cleansing. But remember, when Jesus began his daily ministry in 31 AD after his ascension, he will be doing it until the end of mercy for this entire world. And even the very last man on earth before mercy ends will have rights to confess his sins to Jesus and thus defile the sanctuary because his sin will be recorded there. By confessing our sins, we defile heavenly sanctuary and cleanse ourselves. But on the Day of Atonement, the sanctuary was cleansed, either earthly or heavenly, and the heavenly one is still to happen in the future. In Old Testament, they would confess their sins, offer an animal, and by its blood sprinkle behind the curtain upon the altar, and man would get cleansed while sanctuary would get defiled. Then a day would come back in the Old Testament when it was said that today men would not cleanse themselves from sin anymore. No more defilement of sanctuary because the cleansing of that room is performed today. While the cleansing of the sanctuary was performed, no one could get forgiveness of sin anymore, for when the man is cleansed, the sanctuary is defiled. But when the sanctuary is cleansed, then man is unable to receive forgiveness, that is, he remains defiled. After this day, when cleansing of sanctuary is done, then they would start all afresh from beginning. They had the entire plan of salvation performed within a year, from Passover, the first feast, until the end of mercy, the sixth feast, and then seven feasts trip to heavenly Canaan. This is what that ministry represented. So when the sanctuary is being cleansed, Jesus wants to destroy all reports of sins of the saints, and then no new sin can be added when everything is blotted out. This is the literal time of the last 7 plagues. During these last 5 months, the length of the 7 plagues, we will not have a mediator because we are having him now. During the 7 plagues is the time of service of cleansing. There is no mediator then between holy God and fallen man. The judgment falls not in the linen white robes intended for cleansing the sanctuary, but in the intercessory garments which have the breastplate of judgment. While the judgment lasts, we have mediator defending us at the court, providing us with mercy. The judgment will not be there anymore when there is no mercy and no mediator. We have judgment and mediator for us there. The judgment is over, so is the daily intercessory or mediatory service or ministry. This is very simple. And it came to pass, when even I, Daniel, had seen the vision and sought for the meaning, then behold, there stood before me as the appearance of man. And I heard a man's voice between the banks of Ulai, which called and said, Gabriel, make this man to understand the vision. So he came near where I stood, and when he came, I was afraid, and fell upon my face. But he said unto me, Understand, O Son of man, for at the time of the end shall be the vision. Now, as he was speaking with me, I was in a deep sleep on my face toward the ground, but he touched me and set me upright. And he said, Behold, I will make thee know what shall be in the last end of the indignation, for at the time appointed the end shall be. So this vision goes from Medo-Persia all the way until the last end of indignation, that is the 7 plagues. And now the vision is explained to Daniel. The ram which thou sawest having 2 horns are the kings of Media and Persia. The ram is explained here. Angel Gabriel himself interpreted this vision. And the rough goat is the king of Grecia, and the great horn that is between his eyes is the first king. And we know that was Alexander the Macedon or Alexander the Great. Now that he being broken, whereas 4 stood up for it, 4 kingdoms shall stand up out of that nation, but not in his power. Now this is interesting. And in the latter time of their kingdom, when the transgressors are come to the full, a king of fierce countenance and understanding dark sentences shall stand up. This king is often mentioned in other chapters of Daniel as well as Revelation. It is the system of beasts, the Roman papacy, as well as their king, the Pope. And his power shall be mighty, but not by his own power, and he shall destroy wonderfully, and shall prosper and practice. And what else he will do? And he shall destroy the mighty and the holy people. And through his policy also he shall cause craft to prosper in his hand, and he shall magnify himself in his heart, and by peace shall destroy many. And he shall also stand up against the prince of princes, but he shall be broken without hand. When we observe the little horn and the papacy, it tells us here until when it will have power, that is, until when it will reign. He will even rise against Christ, and human hand will not be able to do anything to him, but the stone cut out with our hands shall destroy him. And the vision of the evening and the morning which was told is true. Wherefore shut up the vision, for it shall be for many days. How many kingdoms went through this span of time? This is why it says it shall be for many days. And I, Daniel, fainted, and was sick certain days. Afterward I rose up, and did the king's business. And I was astonished at the vision, but none understood it. Daniel was wondering after the things he seen, and he did not know when the vision begins and when it ends. But in chapter 9 he received the answer. It is well-known prophecy which talks of Christ's first coming, which will be discussed in the next chapter. The Lord gave us a frame at the beginning, and later He's filling it up, and the understanding and entire picture becomes more beautiful and clearer to us. May the Lord be with us all and gives us His spirit of understanding, His precious gems here in this chapter, as well as the other chapters within this book and the book of Revelation. for this is very important for the days we are living in. God be with us all until the next fellowship.